I once trusted my family with my life. Now I'm learning to live with the scars from where they tried to take it. The night my husband Dominic pushed me and our son Caleb off that cliff, I saw the truth in his eyes. Cold, empty. The same eyes that once promised to love me forever now watched us fall into darkness. My sister Vivian stood by his side, her hand on his arm. My parents nodded in approval. All for money. A life insurance policy I never knew existed. They thought we died that night. They celebrated while I lay broken on a hidden ledge, my body shielding my unconscious child. I heard them tell the search party we were gone. I watched my own funeral from the shadows. But something else was born in that fall. Something they never expected. Me. Reborn. And now I haunt their guilty dreams like the ghost they tried to make me. My name is Zara Blackwood, and once upon a time I believed in fairy tales. My husband Dominic was supposed to be my knight in shining armor, my parents my wise guardians, and my sister Vivian my eternal confidant. Together we formed what appeared to be the perfect family portrait, one worth framing and displaying proudly on a mantelpiece. If only I had looked closer at the cracks in the glass. Our annual family vacation to Silver Lake had been a tradition since Dominic and I married 8 years ago. This particular summer was especially significant as we were celebrating my son, Caleb turning 6. He had inherited my dark curls and his father's bright blue eyes, a perfect blend of us both that still made my heart swell with pride whenever I looked at him. The lakeside cabin belonged to my parents, Eleanor and Jerome Mitchell, a weathered yet charming 3-bedroom retreat nestled among towering pines. My mother had insisted on cooking all our meals that week, unusually attentive to what she called our last family gathering before their retirement plans kicked in. Vivian arrived a day late, blaming work complications. My younger sister by 3 years, she had always been the family favorite with her effortless beauty and charm. When she hugged Dominic upon arrival, I noticed her embrace lasted just a heartbeat too long, but I brushed the observation aside. Families were supposed to be close. The first 3 days passed in a pleasant blur of swimming, hiking, and board games by the fireplace. Yet something felt off beneath the surface of our interactions. I caught Dominic checking his phone frequently, stepping outside for calls that never showed up in our shared phone bill. Vivian would follow minutes later, claiming to need fresh air. My father seemed perpetually nervous, jumping at small noises and drinking more whiskey than usual. Mother busied herself with endless preparations, avoiding direct conversations with me. When I mentioned extending our stay by a few days, a panicked look passed between them all so quickly I nearly missed it. The 4th day brought rain, trapping us indoors. While everyone napped after lunch, I searched for Caleb's favorite storybook in Dominic's luggage. Instead, I found a folder containing paperwork I had supposedly signed but had no memory of. Life insurance policies in my name and Caleb's, with coverage amounts that made my stomach turn. $5 million in total, with Dominic as the sole beneficiary. I slid the papers back exactly as I found them, my hands trembling. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps Dominic was simply being thorough with our family planning. But the policies were dated just 2 months ago. And my signature looked off just slightly wrong in the way the tail of the letters curved. That evening, while helping Mother with dinner preparations, I overheard Dominic and Vivian speaking in hushed tones on the back porch. My sister giggled softly. "Soon," she whispered. "Just think about it. No more pretending." "Patience," came my husband's reply. "Everything has to look perfect." I dropped a pot deliberately, announcing my presence before stepping outside. They stood suspiciously far apart, Vivian twirling her blonde hair nervously around one finger. Over dinner, Father announced we should hike to Osprey Cliff at midnight to view the meteor shower forecast for that night. His suggestion was met, with immediate agreement from everyone else, along with strange, significant glances. "We should all go," Mother insisted, looking pointedly at Dominic. "The whole family together." "Even Caleb," Vivian added, though my son was normally in bed by 8. "He would love to see shooting stars." Something in their eagerness made my skin prickle with unease. The cliff was a good hour's hike up treacherous terrain, hardly suitable for nighttime exploration with a child. When I suggested Caleb and I might stay behind, Dominic grew uncharacteristically insistent. "This is important," he said, squeezing my hand hard enough to hurt. "A memory we should all have together." As dusk fell, I tried calling my best friend, Tasha, under the pretense of using the bathroom, but there was no cell service at the cabin. I considered feigning illness, but feared what might happen if I let Caleb go without me. Throughout the evening, I caught each family member watching me when they thought I was not looking, their expressions unreadable in the firelight. At 11:30, we set out with flashlights and water bottles. Dominic carried a sleepy Caleb on his shoulders for the first part of the journey, being uncharacteristically attentive to our son. Vivian walked beside me, linking her arm through mine like we were schoolgirls again. "I love you, sis," she said suddenly. "You know that, right? No matter what happens." The trail grew steeper as we ascended, conversations dropping off as we focused on our footing. My parents led the way, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness ahead. I noticed they had brought an unusually large backpack for a short night hike. At the summit, Osprey Cliff jutted out dramatically over the valley below. The drop was at least 200 feet onto rocky terrain, with barely any vegetation to break a fall. Dominic set Caleb down beside me. Then my family formed an odd semicircle around us, positioning themselves between us and the path back down. "It is beautiful," I said nervously, looking up at the stars rather than at the deadly drop behind me. There were no meteors visible yet. "Maybe we should back up a bit from the edge." "Actually," Dominic said, his voice changing to a tone I had never heard before, "this is the perfect spot for you both." In that terrible moment, as moonlight illuminated their faces, I saw something I had been blind to for years. My husband's expression was not one of love, but of cold calculation. My sister's eyes held not sisterly affection, but covetous desire as she looked at Dominic. My parents stood rigid with grim determination, not parental protectiveness. I grabbed Caleb's hand and tried to step sideways, but there was nowhere to go. The family circle tightened around us like a noose. "What is going on?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. The insurance papers, the whispered conversations, the perfect, terrible plan. Dominic lunged forward so fast I barely had time to react. His hands connected with my shoulders, a forceful shove intended to send me backward over the edge. I clutched Caleb instinctively, turning my body to shield him as we tipped into empty space. The last thing I saw was my husband's face, not filled with remorse or horror, but with cold relief. We fell. The sensation was unlike anything imaginable, a weightless plunge that stole my breath and stopped my heart. Wind rushed past my ears as I wrapped my body around my son, who was screaming in terror. I did not scream. Some primal part of me knew I needed to protect Caleb with every remaining second of my life. The darkness swallowed us whole. I braced. For impact, for the end, for whatever comes after life. But fate had other plans. Instead of rocks, we crashed through dense foliage. My back hit something solid but yielding, a thick branch that cracked beneath our weight but slowed our descent. Pain exploded through my body as we tumbled down what I would later discover was a hidden ledge approximately 50 feet below the cliff's edge, covered by thick vegetation invisible from above. The impact knocked me unconscious briefly. When I came to, my mouth was filled with blood, and every breath sent shards of agony through my ribcage. Caleb lay motionless beside me, his small body crumpled unnaturally. Terror seized me more powerfully than the pain, and I dragged myself the few inches separating us. "Caleb," I whispered, too afraid to speak louder. "Baby, please." I pressed, my fingers to his neck, praying to feel a pulse. When I found it, strong and steady beneath his skin, tears of relief flooded my eyes. He was alive but unconscious, a large bruise already forming on his forehead. His right arm bent at an angle. That made my stomach lurch. Above us, I heard voices. I froze, listening. "Can you see anything?" That was my father, his voice carrying strangely in the night air. "No," Dominic replied, his tone flat, emotionless. "It is too dark down there, but no one could survive that fall." "We need to call it in now," my mother added urgently. "Remember, we were hiking and they slipped." The insurance company will investigate, Vivian said, a tremor in her voice, the only sign of humanity among them. We need to make it convincing. The voices moved away from the edge, discussing details of their cover story. I lay perfectly still, cradling my son, my mind struggling to process the unthinkable. My family had tried to murder us. For money. For freedom. The people I loved most in the world had pushed us off a cliff and were now planning how to collect our life insurance. I do not know how long I remained there, fighting waves of pain and horror. Eventually, I realized I needed to move us to safer ground. The ledge was narrow, sloping toward another drop. If Caleb woke and moved suddenly, he could still fall to his death. Moving caused agony to ripple through my body. My left leg would not support weight, and I suspected at least 3 ribs were broken. But adrenaline is a powerful force. Inch by excruciating inch, I dragged Caleb and myself toward a small hollow where the ledge met the cliff face, a shallow depression that offered minimal shelter. There, I took inventory of our injuries. My leg was badly broken, bone visible through torn flesh. Ribs fractured, shoulder dislocated, multiple lacerations. Caleb's arm was broken, and he likely had a concussion, but otherwise seemed physically intact. I had managed to take the brunt of the fall. I tore strips from my shirt to bind the worst of our wounds, and used my belt to create a makeshift splint for Caleb's arm. Each movement sent waves of nausea through me, but I focused on my son's face, using his life as my anchor against the pain. Dawn broke painfully bright over the valley. With daylight came the sounds of search parties, voices calling our names with mock concern. I caught glimpses of uniforms moving through the trees below, park rangers and emergency responders. Should we call out? Caleb whispered, having regained consciousness an hour earlier. His eyes were wide with confusion and fear. I pressed a finger to his lips, shaking my head. Something primal within me knew we were not safe yet. Not with them still, searching. From our hiding place, I could see Dominic playing the role of distraught husband masterfully, his face contorted with false grief as he spoke urgently to a police officer. My parents clung to each other, my mother's sobs carrying up the mountainside. Vivian stood slightly apart, her expression blank as she stared into the distance. The search continued throughout the morning. At noon, shouts of discovery echoed up from below. They had found evidence planted by my family, I realized. A scrap of my distinctive red hiking jacket, torn and bloodied. Caleb's small backpack, crushed and empty. My father had been carrying these items in his backpack the night before, I now understood. We found blood on the rocks, a ranger's voice carried up to us. A significant amount. No one could have survived, another voice confirmed. I covered Caleb's mouth with my hand as he began to whimper. When darkness fell again, the search parties set up floodlights at the base of the cliff. I knew we could not stay hidden forever. We needed water, medical attention, and safe shelter. Caleb, I whispered when we were alone again, I need you to be the bravest boy in the world right now. Can you do that for me? He nodded solemnly, his 6-year-old face suddenly looking much older in the moonlight. The people who were supposed to love us tried to hurt us, I explained, choosing my words carefully. Including Daddy and Aunt Vivian and Grandma and Grandpa. They think we are dead. And right now, that is what keeps us safe. Do you understand? His small hand found mine in the darkness. They pushed us, he said, his voice tiny but certain. I saw Daddy push you. My heart shattered anew at his words, the final confirmation of a betrayal too monstrous to comprehend. But with the pain came clarity and purpose. We need to get down from here without being seen, I told him. And then we need to disappear. Everyone must believe we died in the fall. That is the only way we will be safe. Under cover of darkness, we began our painful descent. I fashioned a crude crutch from a branch and moved agonizingly slowly, every step torture on my broken body. Caleb clung to my good side, occasionally whimpering but never complaining. Twice we froze as search teams passed nearby, their flashlights sweeping dangerously close to our position. By dawn, we had reached the valley floor on the far side of the search perimeter. My leg was a bleeding mess, infection setting in. Caleb was feverish, his eyes glazed with pain and exhaustion. But we were alive, and we were free of immediate danger. An abandoned ranger station provided temporary shelter. Inside, I found basic first aid supplies, water, and some emergency rations. As I cleaned our wounds, Caleb slept fitfully on a dusty cot. On a small battery-powered radio, I heard the news. Local woman and child presumed dead after tragic hiking accident. Grieving husband and family in shock. The reporter described Dominic as inconsolable. The irony made me sick. I stared at my reflection in a cracked mirror above a small sink. Blood matted my hair. My face was swollen beyond recognition. In that moment, I realized I was looking at a ghost. Zara Blackwood was dead to the world, and perhaps that was my chance for survival. They took everything from us, I whispered to my broken reflection. Now I will take everything from them. Surviving in the ranger station was our first real test. My medical knowledge was limited to a first aid course I had taken when Caleb was born, hardly adequate for treating multiple fractures and preventing infection. The station's supplies were basic but crucial, antiseptic and bandages becoming our most precious resources. Caleb's arm needed proper setting. Using the ranger station's old first aid manual and gritting my teeth against my own pain, I carefully manipulated the brake back into alignment while he bit down on a rolled-up cloth to muffle his screams. The sound of my child in agony nearly broke me, but I had no choice. We could not risk a hospital. Not yet. My leg was worse, the compound fracture already showing signs of infection. I cleaned it obsessively, swallowing expired antibiotics I found in the station's emergency kit and praying they would work. Fever set in during our third night, and I drifted in and out of consciousness while Caleb, brave beyond his years, kept cold compresses on my forehead and made me drink water. When my fever finally broke a week later, I knew we had passed our first hurdle. We were survivors, but surviving was just the beginning. The ranger station had an old television that picked up local channels. From there, I learned that the search for our bodies had been called off. Dominic appeared on screen, his handsome face twisted with fake grief, thanking searchers for their efforts and announcing a memorial service. The camera cut to Vivienne beside him, her hand resting sympathetically on his arm, my parents standing stoically in the background. Caleb refused to watch, turning away whenever his father appeared on screen. At night, he would wake screaming from nightmares of falling, then grow silent and withdrawn for hours afterward. I worried about the psychological damage, but had no way to get him professional help without exposing ourselves. The memorial service was broadcast on local news. I watched with detached fascination as friends and colleagues I had known for years sobbed over empty caskets. Dominic delivered a heartbreaking eulogy about his lost wife and son, his voice cracking at all the right moments. Vivienne read a poem about sisterly love that made my stomach turn. Most shocking was how quickly the mourning period seemed to end. Just 2 weeks after our supposed deaths, I saw footage of Dominic and Vivienne at a restaurant, her hand casually covering his on the table. The anchor did not comment on their apparent closeness, but the implication was clear. Meanwhile, I learned that the insurance investigation was proceeding. $5 million hung in the balance, the ultimate prize for our murderers. I needed to know more, but our isolation made information gathering difficult. When we had healed enough to travel, I knew we needed to leave the ranger station. Someone might check it eventually, and every day there increased our risk of discovery. We needed new identities, a safer location, and resources beyond emergency rations. One night, I cut my hair short with rusty scissors, dyeing it black using shoe polish found in a locker. I altered our clothing with a sewing kit, turning recognizable pieces inside out or adding found items to change their appearance. Caleb watched silently as I transformed us both, his eyes solemn beyond his years. "Are we different people now?" he asked as I trimmed his curls into a shorter style. "No," I told him softly. "We are still us inside, but we need to look different, so the bad people cannot find us." "Daddy is a bad person," he stated flatly. Not a question. "Yes," I answered, my heart breaking anew at the simple truth of it. "And we cannot trust anyone who knows him." We left the ranger station after 3 weeks, traveling at night to a small town 20 miles away. The journey was excruciating with my still healing leg, but we could not risk being seen on roads or at bus stations. I carried Caleb when he grew too tired, ignoring the screaming pain in my body. In the town of Millfield, using cash from the IO Ranger Station's emergency fund, I bought us new clothes from a thrift store and paid for 2 nights at a motel that did not ask questions. There, I made contact with someone who could help us disappear completely. Marcus Chen was a name passed to me years ago by a paralegal at my former law firm, mentioned in hushed tones as someone who could make problems go away. I had never imagined needing such services, but now I was grateful for the memory. Finding him required several burner phones and cryptic messages left at designated locations around town. When we finally met in an abandoned warehouse, he assessed us with cold efficiency. "Death certificates have been issued," he informed me, not bothering with sympathy. "That makes things both easier and harder. Easier to create new identities, harder to access any of your old resources." "I need everything," I told him bluntly. "IDs, background history, a safe place to live." His fee was steep but fair given the complexity of our situation. I paid using the gold wedding band and diamond earrings I had been wearing when we fell, items worth far more than their sentimental value now. 2 days later, Zara and Caleb Blackwood ceased to exist entirely, replaced by Elena and Noah Winters, a mother and son relocating after a painful divorce. Marcus provided a modest apartment in a city 4 hours away, basic furnishings, school records for Noah, and enough cash to last 3 months. After that, we would be on our own. The new apartment was in a nondescript building on the edges of Westbrook, a city large enough to get lost in, but small enough to avoid major news coverage from our former home. I enrolled Caleb in a local elementary school under his new name, inventing a story about an abusive ex-husband to explain our wariness and occasional odd behavior. At night, after putting Caleb to bed, I would sit by the window watching the city lights, planning our next moves. The initial shock and pain had crystallized into something colder and more focused. I needed information before I could act. Using a laptop purchased with cash and public Wi-Fi networks, I began monitoring my killers from afar. Social media provided surprising insights. Vivian had increased her online presence dramatically, posting thinly veiled updates about supporting Dee through this difficult time and finding comfort in unexpected places. My parents had moved quickly, purchasing the retirement home in Florida they had always wanted, their social media showing them smiling on a new lanai. They had wasted no time spending their blood money. Most illuminating was the insurance company's investigation. Through careful hacking of Dominic's email, I discovered the payout was being held pending further review of the circumstances surrounding our deaths. They had questions about the recently purchased policies and the lack of recovered bodies. This delay was clearly causing tension among my betrayers. Dominic's messages to my father grew increasingly terse, blaming him for insisting on the cliff location rather than their original plan involving the lake. My mother sent passive-aggressive texts to Vivian about being too obvious too soon with their relationship. Everything I learned fed the cold fury growing within me. They had killed us for money and freedom, yet were already turning on each other before receiving either. Meanwhile, Caleb was silent at his new school, drawing disturbing pictures of stick figures falling from great heights. His teacher suggested counseling, which I provided myself through books and online resources, afraid to involve professionals who might ask too many questions. At night, he would crawl into my bed, his small body shaking with nightmares. "Are we safe now?" he would whisper in the darkness. "Yes," I would lie, holding him close. "We are safe." But safety was not enough. Not nearly enough. The more I watched my would-be murderers continuing their lives, the more determined I became to destroy them. Not with physical violence, but with something far more lasting and satisfying. I would use my supposed death as my greatest weapon. From the shadows, I would haunt them, turning their own guilt and paranoia against them. I would become the ghost they had tried to create, appearing in ways they could never prove, but could never escape. "They took everything from us," I whispered to Caleb one night as he drifted to sleep. "But what they do not know is that they created something new. something they should fear. 3 months after our fall, I was ready to begin. I had resources, plans, and most importantly, intimate knowledge of my targets. I knew their routines, their weaknesses, their secrets. I knew what would hurt them most, and I knew exactly where to start. Our secure hideout was a basement apartment, in a building owned by a landlord who preferred cash and asked no questions. I transformed it into both a home for Caleb and a command center for what I had begun to think of as Operation Haunting. One wall was covered with monitors displaying surveillance feeds from cameras I had strategically placed near my targets' homes. The adjacent wall held detailed schedules of their movements, relationships, and vulnerabilities. My first discovery was shocking but not surprising. 3 months after our deaths, Dominic and Vivian announced their engagement. The local newspaper ran a small article about the healing power of love after tragedy, describing how my husband and sister had found comfort in shared grief. The accompanying photo showed them looking appropriately somber yet hopeful, standing in front of the home Dominic and I had shared. My home. Caleb saw the article before I could hide it. He stared at the image of his father and aunt for a long moment, then tore it to pieces with a cold precision that frightened me. At 6, almost 7 now, he was changing in ways I could not fully protect him from. "He is not my dad anymore," he stated flatly after destroying the photo. "He is just a bad man." I pulled him close, feeling his small heart beating against mine. "Yes," I agreed softly. "And bad people eventually pay for what they have done." My parents had moved into their dream retirement home in Sarasota, a sprawling single story with a pool and lanai. They had always talked about moving to Florida when they had enough money. Now they had it, bought with their daughter's and grandson's blood. The insurance money remained in limbo, however. Through careful digital surveillance, I learned that the insurance company had extended their investigation period. They found the timing of the policy purchase suspicious, as well as the lack of recovered bodies. This delay was creating tension among my killers. Perfect. My first act of psychological warfare was simple but effective. Using skills learned from online courses in cybersecurity, I hacked into their smart home systems one by one. Nothing dramatic at first, just subtle manipulations that could be attributed to technical glitches. The thermostat in Dominic and Vivian's bedroom would drop to freezing in the middle of the night. My parents' security system would trigger false alarms at random intervals. I escalated gradually. One day, Dominic's phone played the lullaby I used to sing to Caleb during a business meeting. Vivian's laptop displayed a screensaver of photos from my last birthday party for 3 seconds before returning to normal. My mother's favorite television show was interrupted by static that, if listened to closely, contained my voice whispering her name. Through cameras hidden in air vents and smoke detectors, I watched their reactions. Dominic would shake his head as if clearing water from his ears. Vivian began checking over her shoulder more frequently. My mother increased her medication dosage. My father started drinking earlier in the day. Small cracks were forming in their perfect new lives. Simultaneously, I began my anonymous campaign with the insurance company. Using untraceable emails and voice-modified phone calls, I reported inconsistencies in their statements, suggested that the hiking trail had safety features that would have prevented an accidental fall, questioned why the search was called off so quickly. Each communication was carefully crafted to seem like it came from different concerned parties: a park ranger with doubts, a hiker who was there that weekend, a forensic expert questioning the blood evidence. Nothing directly accusatory, just enough to keep the investigation active and the money out of their hands. The financial pressure was having its effect. Dominic had spent lavishly in anticipation of the payout, renovating the house and buying an engagement ring for Vivian that cost more than our first car. My parents had purchased their Florida home with a large down payment, expecting to pay off the balance with insurance money. Bills were mounting, and with them, tensions. In their moments of stress, I was always there, an invisible presence just beyond perception. When Dominic shouted at Vivian about money, the lights would flicker briefly. When my parents argued about the delayed payout, their pool pump would make a strange sound like a child crying. The next phase required more direct action. Using a network of trusted contacts provided by Marcus, I began leaving physical reminders of my existence in their spaces. A coffee mug I had loved, one they thought had been packed away, would appear on Dominic's desk. A child's drawing signed by Caleb would be found in my mother's knitting basket. These objects would disappear before they could be shown to others, making them question their own sanity. Was grief playing tricks on their minds? Or was something more sinister at work? The wedding planning became a particular focus of my attention. Vivienne had always envied my relationship with Dominic, had always wanted what was mine. Now she was planning an elaborate ceremony with my husband, in my church, wearing a dress suspiciously similar to mine. The ultimate theft. The final insult. 2 weeks before their wedding date, I struck. Having studied their wedding website in detail, I sent anonymous emails to every guest revealing the suspicious timing of their relationship, how quickly they had found comfort in each other after my tragic death. I included photos taken from long-range lenses showing them kissing just 3 weeks after I supposedly died. Half the guest list declined within days. Simultaneously, I arranged for delivery of identical centerpieces to those we had at our wedding, to arrive at their venue. The florist's card read, "In loving memory of what came before." Vivienne was furious, convinced Dominic had ordered them in some misguided tribute. Dominic suspected a prank by one of my old friends. Their argument was spectacular, captured in high definition on my surveillance system. "You promised we would start fresh, Vivienne," screamed, hurling one of the centerpieces against the wall. "But she is everywhere! In this house! In your head!" "Do not be ridiculous," Dominic snapped back. "She is dead. Gone." "Then why does it feel like she is watching us?" Vivienne whispered, her voice breaking. I smiled at my screen. "Because I am, dear sister, I always am." Meanwhile, Caleb was adapting to our new life with the resilience only children possess. He attended school as Noah Winters, made a few cautious friends, and excelled academically. In therapy sessions, I conducted myself using psychological texts. He expressed his feelings through art and play, working through trauma I could scarcely imagine. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked the question I had been dreading. "Are we ever going to tell people we are alive?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "Someday," I promised, "but not until the bad people pay for what they did to us." "Are you making them pay now?" His eyes were too knowing for a child so young. "Yes," I admitted, seeing no point in lying. "I am making them afraid, like they made us afraid. I am making them doubt everything, like they made us doubt everything we believed in." He nodded, accepting this with a child's understanding of justice. "Good," he said simply, then rolled over to sleep. The next morning, I found a drawing on my desk. It showed 4 stick figures looking afraid, surrounded by ghostly shapes that resembled Caleb and me. At the bottom, he had written in careful block letters, "We see you." I pinned it to my planning board. Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom, and sometimes perfect vengeance. They had made us ghosts. Now we would haunt them until they destroyed themselves from within. My carefully orchestrated haunting was working better than I had anticipated. 5 months into my campaign, the cracks in my betrayers' relationships were widening into chasms. Dominic had begun having nightmares so severe he would wake screaming my name, something Vivienne did not appreciate. Their arguments echoed through their home, captured perfectly by my hidden microphones. "I cannot keep doing this," Vivienne shouted during a particularly vicious fight. "You see her everywhere, in your sleep, in this house, even in me sometimes. The way you look at me sometimes, like you are seeing a ghost." "I am not seeing anything," Dominic insisted, but the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. He had begun drinking heavily, starting earlier each day, his work performance suffering noticeably. I had graduated from subtle manipulations to more direct psychological attacks. Using deepfake technology, I created brief glimpses of myself that would appear on their security cameras, a familiar silhouette walking past a window, there and gone so quickly they questioned if they had seen anything at all. The wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Officially, they blamed venue issues, but in reality, Vivienne had thrown her engagement ring at Dominic during a fight about his growing paranoia. She had retrieved it the next morning, but their relationship was fracturing under the weight of unseen pressure. My parents were faring no better. Their dream retirement had soured as financial concerns mounted and strange occurrences plagued their new home. My father had become convinced the house was built on cursed ground, jumping at shadows and refusing to enter certain rooms alone. My mother had taken to anxiously checking the mail every day, hoping for the insurance payout that would solve their mounting debt problems. Instead, she frequently found strange envelopes containing small items that had belonged to me or Caleb. A hair ribbon, a Lego piece, a button from my favorite coat. No return address, no explanation. The insurance investigation had stalled completely, thanks to my anonymous tips. The company had placed the claim under review pending further information, effectively freezing the payout indefinitely. This financial pressure was the perfect catalyst for discord among my killers. I decided it was time to escalate further. Using information gathered from months of surveillance, I crafted personalized torments for each betrayer, designed to exploit their specific fears and weaknesses. For Dominic, who had always been intensely private about his work communications, I began sending emails from an account that appeared to be his own to his colleagues, subtle messages that made him appear unstable. Nothing overt, just concerning. Enough that his coworkers began watching him closely, whispering behind his back. For Vivian, whose social image had always been paramount, I created a shadow social media presence that posted old photos of us together at precisely timed intervals, always with captions that hinted at betrayal without stating it outright. Sisters forever, until the end. Some bonds can never be broken, even by death. Her friends began asking uncomfortable questions. For my mother, whose greatest fear had always been public humiliation, I arranged for small remembrance notices about me and Caleb to appear in local papers on significant dates, submitted anonymously but clearly from someone who knew intimate details of our lives. For my father, who had always been superstitious despite his outward rationality, I focused on creating experiences that seemed supernatural. Objects moved between rooms. The smell of my perfume would appear and disappear. Recordings of Caleb's laughter played at the edge of hearing through their smart speakers. The most effective tactic, however, was turning them against each other. This required minimal effort on my part, merely planting seeds of doubt that their own guilt and fear fertilized abundantly. An anonymous note to Vivienne suggesting Dominic had taken out additional life insurance on her. A forwarded email to my father implying my mother had been in contact with the insurance investigator privately. Small discrepancies in their shared accounts that suggested financial impropriety. I watched through my surveillance as suspicion blossomed between them. Vivian began checking Dominic's phone when he was in the shower. My father installed his own security cameras without telling my mother. They were destroying their relationships without realizing the architect of their misery was watching every moment. The breaking point came when I arranged for each of them to receive a single black rose on the 6-month anniversary of our supposed deaths. Attached to each rose was a small note with a different message, each designed to create maximum suspicion. For Dominic, I know what really happened on the cliff. For Vivian, he will betray you like he betrayed her. For my mother, the insurance company knows more than you think. For my father, they are planning to blame it all on you. That night, Dominic accused Vivian of sending the roses as a sick joke. She responded by packing a bag and checking into a hotel. My parents called Dominic in a panic, and he hung up on them, convinced they were trying to frame him for something. The next day, Vivian withdrew a significant amount from their joint account. My father contacted a lawyer without telling my mother. The web of trust between them was unraveling completely. Meanwhile, Caleb and I had settled into a strange but stable routine. During the day, he attended school as Noah while I worked remotely, as a freelance data analyst, a skill I had acquired during our months in hiding. At night, we monitored our surveillance and planned our next moves together. Caleb had become my partner in this dark endeavor, his child's mind offering surprising insights into what would frighten our targets most. I worried sometimes about the effect this quest for vengeance might have on him, but therapy sessions and regular check-ins reassured me that he was processing his trauma in his own way. "When will we stop being ghosts?" he asked one evening as we watched Dominic pace his living room, jumping at every shadow. "Soon," I promised. "We are almost ready for the final act." That final act was taking shape in my mind, a culmination of months of psychological warfare. I had been laying groundwork for weeks, gathering evidence, making connections, preparing for a revelation that would destroy them, not just emotionally, but legally and socially as well. The insurance company had begun a formal fraud investigation, sparked by anonymous tips and inconsistencies in their statements. Police had reopened the case as a potential homicide, though they still believed Caleb and I were dead. Dominic had been brought in for questioning twice, each time returning home more agitated and suspicious of everyone around him. My parents had consulted a second lawyer about protecting their assets, convinced the insurance investigation might lead to criminal charges. Vivian had begun quietly seeing a therapist, admitted to friends that she sometimes felt like she was being watched. They were all primed for what came next. Paranoid, isolated, suspecting each other of treachery. Perfect. The engagement party was scheduled despite their strained relationship, a desperate attempt to maintain appearances. My parents would attend, along with a small circle of friends, who had not been alienated by their behavior. The venue was my parents' new home in Florida, a final celebration before Dominic and Vivian returned north to resume wedding planning. It was the perfect opportunity for my endgame. All my targets gathered in one location, surrounded by witnesses to their downfall. A setting I had mapped meticulously through digital surveillance. A guest list I had studied and manipulated. Everything was prepared. The evidence gathered. The authorities alerted to watch for specific signals. The technology in place for maximum impact. As I made final preparations, I caught Caleb watching me with solemn eyes. "Will we go back to being ourselves after this?" he asked. I knelt before him, taking his small hands in mine. "Yes," I promised. "After this, Elena and Noah can rest. Zara and Caleb will return, stronger than before. And the bad people will be gone?" "Not gone," I corrected gently. "But they will never hurt us again. They will pay for what they did, and everyone will know the truth." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. I am tired of pretending." So was I. Tired of shadows and whispers, of being a ghost in my own life. It was time to step into the light, to rise from the abyss they had thrown us into. Reborn not as victims, but as avengers. The engagement party was 3 days away. Soon, very soon, they would learn that the dead do not always stay buried. Sometimes they come back, carrying truth like a weapon, justice like a shield. And sometimes they get the last laugh. The night of the engagement party arrived with perfect timing. A subtropical storm hovered offshore, not close enough to cancel the event, but near enough to create an atmosphere of unease. Lightning illuminated the Florida sky in sporadic bursts as guests arrived at my parents' waterfront home, an extravagant Spanish-style villa purchased with blood money. Through surveillance cameras I had installed weeks earlier, I watched the scene unfold from a rental house just 3 properties away. Caleb sat beside me, dressed in black like me, his small face solemn as we observed our family's false celebration. "They look scared," he noted, as Dominic and Vivian greeted guests with strained smiles. He was right. Despite their elegant attire, all 4 conspirators appeared haggard. Dominic's eyes constantly scanned the room. Vivian clutched her champagne, glass too tightly. My father had visibly lost weight. My mother's smile never reached her eyes. "They should be," I replied. "Tonight, everything changes." The first phase of my plan was already in motion. 20 minutes before the party began, I had sent identical text messages to all 4 of them from an untraceable number. "I know what happened on the cliff. Everyone will know by midnight." Their reactions told me everything. Dominic had immediately pulled Vivian into my father's study for a heated discussion. My parents had argued in their bedroom, my mother gesturing wildly, while my father checked that the windows were locked. They had reconvened in the kitchen, 4 guilty people bound by a shared crime, frantically whispering before guests arrived. Perfect. Seeds of panic planted, ready to bloom into full terror. The party progressed with painful artificiality. 40. Guests mingled in the expansive living room and on the lanai overlooking the darkened bay. Caterers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. To casual observers, it appeared to be a tasteful celebration. But through my monitors, I observed every crack in the facade. At precisely 9:30 p.m., I initiated Phase 2. Using the access I had established to their smart home system, I triggered a complete power outage. The house plunged into darkness, emergency generators failing to activate due to my earlier sabotage. Panicked murmurs filled the darkness, followed by the glow of cell phone flashlights. My father's voice rose above the confusion, assuring everyone the power would return shortly. But it would not. Not until I allowed it. In the dark chaos, Caleb and I slipped from our observation post and approached the house. Months of planning had prepared us for this moment. We knew every entry point, every blind spot in their security system. While guests congregated in the main living area, we entered through the poolside door using the key code I had observed my mother entering countless times through surveillance. We moved silently through the darkened house to my predetermined position, a hidden alcove in my father's study adjacent to the living room. From here, we could observe unseen until the moment of revelation. 10 minutes into the blackout, as my father fumbled with the breaker box and Dominic attempted to calm increasingly restless guests, I triggered Phase 3. Every screen in the house, from televisions to tablets to the large smart display in the living room, suddenly illuminated, bathing the space in blue-white light. On each screen appeared a single image, a family photo taken at the lake the day before they tried to kill us. Dominic, Vivienne, my parents, Caleb and me, smiling for the camera, the cliff visible in the background. Below the image, a timer counted down from 5 minutes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vivienne dropped her champagne glass, the shattering sound loud in the sudden silence. Dominic froze, staring at the nearest screen with undisguised horror. "What is this?" someone asked. "Some kind of memorial video?" Neither Dominic nor Vivienne answered. My parents retreated to the corner of the room, my mother gripping my father's arm with white knuckles. When the timer reached 4 minutes, the image changed to a split screen. On one side, the family photo. On the other, security camera footage from their own devices capturing damning conversations over the past months. Dominic to Vivienne. "No one can ever know what we did." My father to my mother. "The insurance money will be worth it." Vivienne looking directly at a hidden camera. "Sometimes I swear I can feel her watching me." My mother counting cash. "Once the claim finally processes, we will be set for life." Guests began to shift uncomfortably, confused conversations breaking out across the room. The 4 conspirators remained frozen, unable to explain or escape. As their private moments played out publicly, at 3 minutes the screens changed again. Now they displayed the life insurance policy documents, with key sections highlighted: the recent purchase date, the massive payout amount, the sole beneficiary. "Dominic, what is this?" asked his boss, pointing at the screen. "Why would you take out such a large policy right before the accident?" Before he could answer, the timer hit 2 minutes, and the screens transitioned to topographic maps of the cliff area, overlaid with analysis from safety experts I had consulted, clearly showing that an accidental fall from that location was nearly impossible without deliberate action or sabotage. The room had grown deadly quiet, all pretense of a celebration abandoned. Several guests were backing toward the door. Others stared at my family with dawning suspicion. Someone had called the police, their hushed voice clearly audible in the silence. At 1 minute, the screens displayed a letter I had composed, detailing the events of that night from my perspective. My words scrolled slowly enough for everyone to read, describing the conspiracy, the push, our survival, and my months watching them from the shadows. The final lines explained that all evidence displayed had been forwarded to police and insurance investigators. When the timer reached 0, every light in the house blazed to life simultaneously. And there I stood, in the center of the living room, Caleb holding my hand beside me. The shock was absolute. Vivienne screamed, a high, shrill sound of pure terror. My mother collapsed into a chair, her face drained of all color. My father took an involuntary step backward, colliding with the wall. And Dominic, my husband, the father of my child, the man who had tried to murder us both, stared as though seeing an actual ghost. "Hello, family," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Did you miss us?" The chaos that followed was precisely what I had anticipated. Guests fled in panic. My mother began sobbing uncontrollably. My father made a desperate dash for a side door, but was intercepted by the private security I had hired for this exact purpose. Dominic, always calculating, recovered first. "Zara," he said, his voice cracking slightly. This is a miracle. We thought you were dead. We mourned you." "Save it," I cut him off. "Everyone in this room just watched you incriminate yourself. The police have been receiving evidence for weeks. They are already on their way." As if summoned by my words, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Vivian lunged toward me suddenly, her face contorted with rage and fear. "You ruined everything," she hissed, fingers curved like claws. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between us. "Do not touch my mom," he said, his voice small but unwavering. "Not ever again." She froze, staring down at the nephew she had helped try to murder. Whatever she saw in his eyes made her retreat, sinking to the floor in defeat. The police arrived with an insurance investigator in tow. I provided them with flash drives containing all my evidence, statements I had prepared, witness contacts I had gathered. The 4 conspirators were separated and questioned, each breaking down under pressure, each attempting to minimize their own role while implicating the others. My father claimed it was all Dominic's idea. My mother insisted she had been coerced. Vivian blamed my parents for pushing the cliff location. Dominic, coldly pragmatic even now, requested a lawyer and said nothing more. Standing in the wreckage of the party, watching police lead my family away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, only a deep exhaustion and relief that it was finally over. 1 year later, life had found a new rhythm. The trials had concluded with convictions for all 4 conspirators. Dominic and my father received the harshest sentences, 20 years each for attempted murder and conspiracy. Vivian and my mother got 15 years apiece. The insurance money, ironically, was eventually paid out to me, the intended victim, after I was legally declared alive again. I used it to buy a small house near the ocean, far from our old hometown, and to establish a foundation for survivors of family violence. Caleb was healing slowly. Therapy 3 times a week, new friends at school, a growing interest in rock climbing that helped him reclaim his power over the cliff that had nearly claimed his life. He still had nightmares sometimes, but they came less frequently now. As for me, I had reclaimed my identity, but was forever changed by my journey through death and rebirth. I no longer trusted easily or took relationships at face value, but I had found strength I never knew I possessed. On the anniversary of our fall, Caleb and I visited the cliff together. Standing safely back from the edge, we released biodegradable lanterns into the night sky, not to mourn what we had lost, but to celebrate what we had found within ourselves. "Are we still ghosts now?" Caleb asked as we watched the lanterns drift upward. I wrapped my arm around his shoulders, feeling the solid presence of my son, my reason for survival, for vengeance, for redemption. "No," I told him, smiling as our lanterns joined the stars. Now, we are simply survivors. Later that week, I received a notification that Dominic wanted to speak with me from prison, his first attempt to make contact since his sentencing. For a moment, I considered what he might want to say, what explanations or apologies he might offer. Then I deleted the request without reading it. Some chapters needed no epilogue. Some betrayals required no further understanding. We had survived the fall. We had emerged from the shadows. We had turned their guilt into our salvation. And in the end, the dead had indeed gotten the last laugh.